Maudie raised an eyebrow. She sauntered over and picked up the document. As a divorce agreement, it was very fair. It was even in her favor. Not only was he giving her half of his shares and real estate, but he was also giving her $100 billion in cash. This man was unbelievably generous. But Maudie recalled the events of the day before, when the original owner of this body was forced by her family to get money from Harvey. However, Harvey proposed a divorce. Instead, she was so sad that she got drunk and ended up being drugged by a hooligan. That pitiful woman had loved Harvey for so many years, but he had nearly caused her to lose her virginity to that disgusting hooligan. Maudie's gaze turned cold. Since she had taken over the host's body, she had to take revenge for her. A divorce is fine. Maudie put down the document and leaned closer to him. She put her long finger on his chest and said, "But you'll have to raise the stakes." When she spoke, her expression and tone were extremely charming. It was a vast difference from how weak she was previously. As if she was a completely different person. Harvey's eyes flickered, but his expression remained unchanged. Sure, it was her first time last night. This request was reasonable. Harvey took out a brand new agreement. He changed the 100 billion rupiah into 200 billion rupiah and handed it to her again. Maudie was speechless. He added 100 billion. Just like that. It seemed that demanding more money would not be able to get back at him. Finding it boring, Maudie slowly took the pen from him. However, a second before she signed, she stopped and looked up with a wicked smile as she said, "I'm going back on my word again." Harvey frowned slightly and did not speak. "I don't want this extra 100 billion anymore. Just take it as the service fee for sleeping with you last night." The more Maudie thought about it, the more amused she became. She tapped the pen on her fair chin and said, "After all, your skills are really quite good. It's the best I've come across." Harvey was speechless. Maudie observed his expression carefully and was satisfied to see a flash of anger cross his face. Humiliated him? That's great. Maudie didn't wait for him to speak. She snatched the previous document over and signed her name on it. "When are you going to transfer the money to me? When are you going to get the certificate? Hurry up. I'm very busy." Her time was meant to be spent on investigating the cause of her death. It was very valuable. Harvey looked at the signed document and was slightly stunned. She agreed to the divorce. Previously, he had also proposed a divorce, but she would bawl to no end every single time, and he could only let the matter slide in the end. After all, although he did not love her, he still treated her as his younger sister and could not bear to hurt her. Yesterday was the first time Maudie had agreed to a divorce. However, she was not as decisive as she was now. It was as if she no longer had any feelings for him. After being lost in thought for a while, Harvey snapped out of it and stopped thinking about it. Her agreeing to the divorce solved one of his biggest problems. Harvey took out a black card and said, "The money has already been transferred to this card. In the future, the company's share dividends will also be deposited into this card. Let's go to the city hall now." Maudie accepted it without hesitation. She had just entered this unfamiliar body and did not know much about the outside world. There was no harm in getting more money. See, Tayway T. When they arrived at the city hall, the two of them got out of the car. The Brahmasta Corporation's bodyguards had already cleared the place. Only the two of them were left in the huge place. Without even looking at Harvey, Maudie knocked on the teller window and said, "Hello, we're here to get a divorce." The staff had long received the news that CEO Brahmasta was coming here to get a divorce. They thought that they would see CEO Brahmasta's wife crying. But in the end, they were astonished by her confidence. "Okay, was CEO Brahmasta's wife, not in the least bit sad to break up with such an outstanding man. The staff came to his senses and said, "Mrs. Brahmasta and CEO Brahmasta, please pass me your household register, identification cards, and marriage certificate." So, troublesome, Maudie searched her bag, but found nothing. Crap. Only then did she remember that all her ID and frequently used bank cards had been confiscated by the Wijaya family. Harvey had already taken out the household register. Noticing that she was motionless, he could not help but take a second glance. Maudie let out a cough and said, "I think I didn't bring my ID." Is this the reason why she signed so decisively just now? She knew they wouldn't be able to get a divorce. Taking a deep breath, Maudie was about to say that she would go back and get her ID when her phone rang. Pablo's name appeared on the screen. She picked it up with a frown. "Dad." Before she could finish her sentence, Pablo's stern voice came from the other end. "This is already the third day. Where's the 50 billion I asked you to ask Harvey for? As the wife of the CEO of the Brahmasta Corporation, you can't even bring back 50 billion. What's the point of the Wijaya family raising a good-for-nothing like you?" ELIT. The sound was ear-piercing. Maudie couldn't help but move her phone a little further away from her ear. Her lips curled up coldly. As expected, the host's biological father didn't treat her as a human. He only treated her as a money tree. It was said that with a stepmother, there would be a stepfather. Indeed, after marrying her stepmother, Pablo's attitude towards her became worse. He rarely contacted her except to ask her for money. As long as the host went home alone, her family would hit and scold her. The host didn't dare to fight back or complain. Thinking of this, Maudie couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Perhaps the host's emotions were acting up. "Speaking of good for nothing, shouldn't you reflect on yourself?" Maudie mocked him mercilessly. "My maternal grandfather gave you the company in good condition, but you caused him to incur a loss of 50 billion rupiah, yet you're coming to me for money. Who's the good for nothing? You." Pablo did not expect her to talk back, and was stunned. There were a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Only Pablo's labored breathing could be heard. After a while, he finally snapped. "Get back home! We'll talk then. You think you're all grown up. Don't forget that your mother is still in the sanatorium," he continued. With that, he hung up. Maudie narrowed her eyes. The host did have a biological mother who had been sent to a sanatorium due to a mental illness. Is Pablo threatening her with this now? Looks like she has to make this trip, be it to retrieve her ID or for something else. Tend. Wentin way des. An hour later, a luxurious Maybach stopped outside the Wijaya family's villa. The car door opened, and a long, straight leg covered in black boots stepped out first. "Wait for me here." Maudie casually tidied her curly hair and fiery red skirt. "I'll get my ID and come back down soon." Seated in the back seat, Harvey nodded briefly. Without further ado, Maudie entered the yard, raised her hand, and knocked on the door. This was her own home, yet she still had to knock on the door. How ironic. Soon, a servant opened the door. At a glance, Maudie saw a few people in the living room. Her father, Pablo, her stepmother, Suzanne, and her stepsister, Madeline. "Ha! Everyone is here." Hearing the sound, the three people sitting on the sofa looked at her with dark expressions, especially Pablo, whom she had just talked back to. Maudie pretended not to see it and got straight to the point. "Where's my identity card?" Pablo clenched his teeth and narrowed his eyes dangerously. "What do you need your identity card for?" he asked suspiciously. Before Maudie could answer, Suzanne suddenly sprang up from the sofa and took 2 steps closer to her. Staring at Maudie's neck, Suzanne looked like she had discovered the new world. You slept with Harvey, didn't you? Seeing her hickey, Suzanne turned to Pablo and said excitedly, "Hubby, this DXMN girl is sleeping with Harvey. She must have gotten the money. Quick, ask her to save us, save our company." Pablo relaxed and said, "Now that you have the money, hurry up and hand it over." Maudie did not speak. Madeline, on the other hand, was so angry that her eyes turned red. "Shameless BX Teach, you slept with a man just to get money." She simply could not accept that her outstanding brother-in-law actually slept with this BX Teach. Soon, the 3 years of their contractual marriage would be over. At that time, she would be able to kick Maudie aside and take her place. Maudie glanced at Madeline, who was unable to conceal the jealousy in her eyes. TSK, yearning for your brother-in-law. Leisurely leaning against the door, she said, "How is it shameless for me to sleep with my own husband? On the contrary, it's more shameless for some people to think about sleeping with someone else's husband." Madeline's thoughts were exposed, and she wanted to slap Maudie. "BX Tech, I'll smash your mouth in." Maudie simply looked at her mockingly and grabbed her hand in one move. She was extremely strong, and Madeline cried out. Loathing flashed across Maudie's eyes. Then she turned to Pablo. "Harvey has already signed a divorce agreement with me. Give me my identity card. When I successfully get a divorce, I'll consider splitting some money with you. If you don't take it, you can go and rob a bank if you want money." Pablo was furious. On the contrary, Suzanne's eyes lit up, and she said, "Sure." She hurriedly pulled Pablo back and earnestly persuaded him. "Hubby, let her get a divorce. Let Madeline marry him instead. Harvey is such an outstanding man. How can she be worthy of him? Only our Madeline is worthy of him." Madeline's eyes lit up when she heard this. However, Pablo frowned and said, "Number." He was all too clear that this marriage was arranged by Old Master Bramasta, and that Old Master Bramasta was only pleased with Maudie. Pablo wanted to marry Madeline over, but the other side probably wouldn't accept it. Why not? Madeline yelled in disappointment, "Dad, just let me go. I'm willing to marry brother-in-law for the sake of the company's funds. This BXT is so useless. She didn't get any money even after sleeping with brother-in-law. If I go, I can definitely do it." She suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. This was because, with a cold expression on her face, Maudie had raised her hand and ruthlessly slapped Madeline's face. "This slap is to teach you a lesson. Take a look at yourself in the mirror and see what you're worth. Don't be like your mother, always thinking about other people's husbands." Massaging her sore wrist, Maudie glanced sideways at Suzanne, whose expression was extremely awful. She deliberately made a jab at the mother and daughter's sore spot as she scolded Madeline her face and got up from the ground with her hair in a mess. She looked like a crazy woman. You're crazy. How dare you hit me?" She felt a burning pain on her left cheek, as if it had swelled up in an instant. It was so numb that she could no longer feel anything. Seeing his beloved daughter getting slapped, Pablo trembled with anger. Picking up the baseball bat that was placed at the side of the living room, he walked towards her. "Who taught you to say such things? You ill-bred thing. I'll teach you a lesson today." As Suzanne and Madeline enjoyed the show, Maudie simply held his wrist and exerted a little force, making him let go of the baseball bat. She kicked his knee pit, and Pablo immediately fell on his knees before her. Pablo was in utter disbelief. When did this girl become so strong? In the past, Maudie only knew how to cry and bear with it. How can such a drastic change happen overnight? Pablo was in a state of shock, and his thoughts were in chaos. "Teach me a lesson. What right do you have to do that?" Maudie bent down and looked at him coldly. The corners of her lips curled up into a scornful and derisive smile. You only have your current life because of my mother's dowry and my maternal grandpa's support. Don't forget your roots when you're living off a woman. She turned back to look at Suzanne's pale face and continued. This villa that you guys are staying in belongs to my mother. Living in someone else's house and sleeping with someone else's husband isn't a certain someone afraid of having nightmares. Suzanne's breathing became labored due to anger. Maudie sat down and glanced at Suzanne, who was speechless, relaxedly slumping into the sofa. Maudie looked down and fiddled with her nails. Every corner in the villa seemed to be filled with beautiful memories of the host and her mother. She felt a slight ache in her heart. Bolshek's tea. This villa was willingly given to me when your mother and I got divorced. What do you know? Upon hearing this, Pablo's fat chin and belly quivered with anger. It was hard to look at. What exactly did Mum like about him? Back then, do you think a mental health patient's willingness is believable? Who knew if she had been forced? Maudie lifted her eyes and thought of the poor mother in her memories. Her eyes darkened and she said, "Give me my identity card and let me take my mother away. From now on, I have nothing to do with the Wijaya family. How about that?" How could Pablo be willing to do that? If he doesn't have this trump card, how can he continue to threaten Maudie and get her to bring more money back? He looked at his somewhat unfamiliar daughter with an inquisitive and contemplative gaze. Don't forget that your mother has a terrible relationship with you. She only trusts me now. If she doesn't see me, she will commit suicide. She has cut her wrist and jumped off a building more than once. Are you trying to kill her? Is this a threat? Usually, Maudie hated it when people threatened her, but now she had no choice but to take it into consideration. A mental health patient's behavior was uncontrollable. She could not possibly be watching her at all times. She could only have her staying in the sanatorium for now and let them take care of her for a while. At the thought of this, Maudie stood up. There wasn't a trace of familial love or reluctance in her eyes. Instead, there was an indifference that was almost heartless. Okay, Mom will stay in the sanatorium, but if I catch wind of anything happening to her or that she has been aggrieved, we'll meet in court. I don't mind letting the judges hear about the terrible things that happened in the Wijaya family and ruining your reputation. You were unfaithful during your marriage and let your mistress become your wife. You started your career by living off a woman and treated your ex-wife harshly. It'll probably take more than 3 days and nights to list out all the sins you've committed. Isn't that right? Maudie tilted her head and pretended to be naive as she listed their sins. Oops. I really can't bring myself to talk about them. I don't know how you guys are so thick-skinned to be able to do those things. Even beasts can't do that. Right? TSK. You. Pablo pointed at her, breathing laboriously in anger. Maudie smiled and used her fingers to push Madeline, who was blocking her way, aside. She wanted to go upstairs to look for her identification card. However, the next moment, she felt someone tugging on her hair. Her body staggered backward uncontrollably. From the corner of her eye, she saw Suzanne's vicious expression. She instantly moved into a horse stance to adjust her center of gravity and nimbly leapt down. I'll rip your mouth out. Suzanne couldn't take it anymore. Pablo was also taking her side. His eyes were ablaze as he raised his arm to hit her. This couple is going to gang up to hit her again. Maudie clenched her fists and prepared to punch Pablo in the abdomen. However, she then saw Pablo bent over with a pained expression on his face. He sank to the ground like cotton and started wailing in anguish. Harvey's tall and handsome figure appeared in front of everyone. The heroine is currently facing a difficult situation and needs your support. Please leave your words of encouragement for her in the comments section. Really came at the right time. Maddie took the opportunity to retract her fist and pursed her lips as she said, "I'm sorry. It's just some family matters. I've embarrassed myself in front of CEO Brahmasta." Harvey's brows furrowed as he scrutinized Maddie, who was speaking in a relaxed tone. After waiting for her for a long time outside, he wondered if something had happened. So he came in to take a look. Who would have thought that he would witness such a good show? Harvey's expression darkened, and he asked, "Do they always beat you like this?" Gauging from her calm tone, it seemed like she was already used to such things. So this is her situation in the Wijaya family. But why has she never mentioned it to him? Pablo had not expected Harvey to turn up. He quickly got up and waved his hands in denial while stammering, "CEO Brahmasta, why didn't you inform us that you were coming beforehand? This isn't what you think. It's all a misunderstanding. We were just fooling around." Harvey ignored him and looked straight at Maddie. Maddie smiled and said, "Yes, we are indeed fooling around. We're playing a game of pretend fighting." Pablo nodded vigorously and said, "Yes, yes." However, the next moment, Maddie picked up the baseball bat from the ground and whacked Pablo hard in the stomach. Pablo's face turned ashen, and he immediately wanted to scream. However, Maddie smiled and said, "See, this is how we play it. This kind of game just looks painful, but it doesn't hurt at all." With that, she shot a threatening glance at Pablo. How could Pablo dare to deny it? Even if he was in so much pain that he almost vomited blood, he still had to smile stiffly and said, Yes, it doesn't hurt at all." Harvey nodded skeptically. Pablo heaved a sigh of relief and quickly left Maddie's killing range. In a bootlicking manner, he said, "CEO Brahmasta, what brings you here all of a sudden?" In the past, Harvey had never accompanied this good-for-nothing daughter home. Otherwise, Pablo would not have been so careless. "I'm accompanying Maddie to take her ID and stuff." Harvey turned his head and asked gently, "Where are your things?" Based on the host's memories, Maddie pointed to the second floor. Harvey looked around at the servants and said coldly, "Go pack her things and bring them down." His tone was icy. The servants did not dare to refute him and quickly went upstairs to pack. Harvey held Maddie's wrist and led her to the sofa to sit down. He quietly looked at Pablo and the others who were standing as if he was the master of the house. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Number." Maddie shook her head. How can Pablo hurt her with his mediocre skills? On the other hand, when Madeline heard Harvey's concern towards Maddie, her eyes were ablaze with jealousy. Brother-in-law is so handsome. He looks even more handsome up close. Such an outstanding man should be her husband. Not that BX teach Maddie. Pablo's eyes darted around as he fawned over Harvey, as though he was looking at a walking check. "CEO Brahmasta, I've been to your company a few times, but I haven't been able to meet you. Look, since we've met, I would like to ask if you are interested in investing in the Wijaya Corporation. After all, you are also the son-in-law of the Wijaya family." Maddie's hand that was holding Harvey froze momentarily. She looked at Pablo coldly, not expecting him to be so shameless. "I'm a businessman, and business is about profit and making money. No one would do a business deal that would incur losses. The Wijaya Corporation has been on the verge of bankruptcy for the past few years. It's in shambles and deep in debt. I can't think of any reason to invest in the acquisition to undertake the risk together. I thought that you would understand if I politely refused to meet you. I didn't think that CEO Wijaya's ability to understand would differ from that of normal humans." Harvey's words caused Pablo's face to turn purple, and he almost fainted. Maddie nearly burst into laughter. He was indeed a man with a sharp tongue and a vicious heart. He did not even use vulgarities when scolding people. It was simply gratifying. Well, you can't say that. We're just temporarily facing some trouble, Pablo said through gritted teeth, not daring to offend Harvey. After all, Harvey was his last hope, so he could only curry favor with him. Seeing how awkward the situation was, a gleam flashed across Suzanne's eyes, and she tugged on Madeline. CEO Bramasta, you came in a hurry. You must be thirsty. Mustn't you? Maudie is really too much. She doesn't even care about her husband, Madeline. Quickly go make a cup of tea for your brother-in-law. CEO Bramasta loves to drink vintage Narcissus tea. Madeline was ecstatic. This is her chance. Very quickly, she finished brewing the tea and walked towards Harvey. Maudie couldn't help but sneer at Madeline's flirtatious behavior as she had deliberately pulled down her off-shoulder dress further to reveal half of her chest. This seduction method was a seriously old trick and not worth mentioning. Brother-in-law, have some tea. This is freshly brewed. Madeline bent down on purpose, revealing her voluptuous chest as she swayed in front of Harvey. Maudie suddenly said, "Vintage Narcissus tea. How did you know I wanted to drink that? Thanks." She took the teacup from the tray and abruptly shook her wrist in midair. The entire cup of tea splashed onto Madeline's face and body. Oops, I didn't hold it properly. I'm sorry. Although she said she was sorry, there was no trace of apology in her tone. Madeline's face was covered in tea, and she couldn't quite open her eyes. She could only use her hands to wipe her eyes as she shrieked. "BX Tetch, you did it on purpose, you!" Her decibel was so high that it hurt Maudie's ears, and she frowned. "Well, I did it on purpose. What can you do about that? You're dressed like a prostitute on the street in the red light district. Why don't you just strip naked to seduce your brother-in-law? You don't have any shame at all. This tea bath is to help you wash your brain. You should be thanking me." Maudie did not give her any face. Every sentence was berating her, and she couldn't refute any of it. Madeline's face turned red from embarrassment. "Brother-in-law, big sister must have misunderstood me." "I didn't." At that moment, Madeline still did not forget to behave coquettishly in front of Harvey. She deliberately pretended to speak in a soft and delicate voice, causing Maudie to feel uncomfortable and slightly nauseous. Harvey acted like he did not hear her. He picked up the 2 pieces of tea leaves from Maudie's body and threw them away. "CEO Bramasta, don't misunderstand. Madeline is still young. She definitely doesn't have the intention to seduce you like Maudie said." Pablo wanted to rip Maudie's mouth apart. Pablo could tell what Suzanne and Madeline were thinking. But he did not stop them. After all, if they could succeed, it would be a good thing for the Wijaya family. However, it was obvious that Harvey had no interest in Madeline. This wasn't going to work out. Young? When Maudie heard his words, she could not help but sit up straight. "If my memory serves me right, Suzanne had already gotten together with you at that age and became your mistress. Isn't that right? She was born less than 2 years after that. How is she considered young? It's truly prenatal education that she already had by the time she was born." "Amazing." Maudie raised her thumb and grumbled, ripping apart the cover that concealed their shame. Besides, even if she didn't mean to seduce him, what's the purpose of having the tea so hot? Does she intend to scald her brother-in-law to death? After she was done with the scolding, Maudie changed the topic and tossed the ball in Harvey's court. Fortunately, Harvey understood her intentions. He gently buttoned up the cufflinks of his suit and frowned as he said coldly, "Looks like you guys are dissatisfied because I didn't invest in the Wijaya Corporation, so you're trying to harm me. Since that's the case, why don't I fulfill your wish?" Harvey looked up and saw the anticipation in Pablo's eyes. As if he was a god, he spoke nonchalantly. How about making the Wijaya Corporation bankrupt? His tone was extremely icy. Maddie was stunned. She did not expect him to do this for her. Is Harvey giving her face, or is he simply not fond of Pablo? CEO Brahmasta, don't. Madeline made a mistake. Don't be angry. Pablo was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. Looking at Madeline, he became infuriated. She only knows how to ruin things. Slap. He raised his hand and slapped Madeline's right cheek. Well, now both sides of Madeline's face were swollen and quite evened out. Pablo pointed at Suzanne and berated her. How did you teach your daughter? Is CEO Brahmasta someone you can lust after and be worthy of? Get on your knees and beg for forgiveness. Hubby. Suzanne had never suffered this kind of grievance before. She hugged Madeline and ignored the look Pablo gave her. Pablo was so anxious that he slapped Suzanne as well. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and apologize. Suzanne covered her face and yelled, You dare to hit me. So what if I hit you? When Pablo raised his hand again, Suzanne was finally afraid. She made up her mind and knelt on the ground, no longer caring about her dignity or face as she begged for mercy. I'm sorry, CEO Brahmasta. It's all our fault. We won't do it again. Harvey looked down at her and said calmly, The person you should apologize to is not me, but Maudie. He actually wanted Suzanne to kneel before Maudie. Maudie was watching the show with interest. She didn't expect everyone to look at her. Harvey's gaze was calm, while the Wijaya family's eyes were filled with hatred. Pablo hesitated for a moment before saying, CEO Brahmasta, I don't think that's a good idea. Suzanne is Maudie's mother after all. If she kneels to Maudie, Maudie's life will be shortened. She can't accept it. Cursing her, Maudie didn't like what she heard. Languidly, she crossed her legs and said, Kneel. It's fine. Even if both of you kneel together, I can accept it. Pablo was speechless from shock. Suzanne was speechless from shock as well. Madeline was so angry that her lips were trembling. Seeing how Harvey was defending Maudie, she wanted to sow discord between them. She stood up and pointed at Maudie as she said sternly, Brother-in-law, don't be fooled by her. You're so protective of her, but she wants to divorce you. Why is that? Madeline laughed coldly and continued, Who knows? She might have another man outside and cuckolded you. That paramour is looking forward to her divorce so that he can be together with her. Madeline's eyes shone with fanaticism. She pushed Suzanne's hand away and shrieked, She doesn't deserve you at all, brother-in-law. Divorce her. I'm willing to be with you. Even if I don't have a status, I'm very obedient. No man can refuse a mistress who offered herself to him and whom they didn't have to be responsible for. Harvey is no exception. Maudie looked at her speechlessly. She is talking about marrying her brother-in-law in front of her sister. Truly, shameless indeed. Maudie's eyes were cold as she walked towards the berserk Madeline. She raised her hand and mercilessly slapped her a few times. Slap. 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 The crisp sound of the slaps reverberated throughout the room. Madeline saw stars and staggered, nearly losing her balance. Maudie, you BX teach. Suzanne wanted to rush over to help Madeline fight, but Pablo's sharp eyes saw that Harvey had no intention of stopping Maudie, so he quickly pulled Suzanne back. Kneel properly. Harvey had completely acquiesced to Maudie's actions. If they were to stop her now, wouldn't they be courting death? Thus, no matter how indignant he was, he could only settle scores with Maudie in the future. Suzanne's expression was one of bitter resentment, but she had no choice but to continue kneeling. Maudie pressed onto Madeline's neck and forced her into a corner. Looking at Harvey's figure reflected in those eyes that were gradually widening due to suffocation, Maudie said lightly, waiting for us to get a divorce. In your next life, even if it's something I don't want, it's not for you to pick it up. Maddie moved closer to Madeline's ear and lightly enunciated a few words. You have no right. Then, she let go and Madeline fell to the ground like a pile of dirt. Let's go. Maddie wiped her hands in disgust. Taking the packed luggage from the servant, she then held Harvey's hand and arrogantly left. When she reached the door, she seemed to suddenly remember something. She looked back at the mess in the living room and the way Pablo was clenching his teeth and looking like he wanted to rip her apart. He did not look like a father, but more like an enemy. Maddie said scornfully, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Take good care of my mother. If I catch any wind of her getting injured, your company will go bankrupt in minutes." She was clearly smiling, but the chilliness was enough to make one's heart tremble and cause fear to rise in one's heart. After saying this, Maddie left with Harvey without any hesitation. After she left, Madeline, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog, finally burst out screaming, "Ah, BX teach, I'm going to kill you." Tien. Inside the car, Harvey and Maddie were both silent. The driver sensed the unusual atmosphere and felt a chill run down his spine. CEO Brahmasta, are we going to the city hall or? He probed, fiddling with her ID card. Maddie remembered the look on the faces of Pablo and the others. She tilted her head to look at Harvey and raised an eyebrow. Let's go home. We're not going to the city hall anymore. Harvey furrowed his brows, as if trying to look past her smiling face to figure out her true thoughts. Right from the start, you never thought of divorcing me, did you? Harvey asked as he recalled her contradictory behavior. Is this another act that she's putting on? Maddie pressed the button on the control panel, and the soundproof panel slowly descended. Isolating the driver, not really. Before I stepped into the Wijaya family's house, I really wanted to divorce you. After all, the 100 of billions worth of divorce alimony is right in front of me. It's much more tempting than you. She was exceptionally frank, causing Harvey's expression to darken. But the Wijaya family disgusts me. They all want me to get a divorce so that Madeline can replace me. Maddie looked at Harvey and said arrogantly, "Why should I let them have their way?" Harvey scrutinized Maddie. This woman has changed so much in just one day. Right now, he couldn't tell if she was telling the truth or not. Don't worry. There's only 3 months left in our contract marriage. When the time comes, I will definitely give your freedom back to you. Maddie magnanimously patted Harvey's shoulder. As if trying to console him, she rolled down the car window and felt the breeze outside. Even if you're unwilling, bear with it for a while after all. As long as I don't agree, you can't divorce me. Isn't that right? Harvey pursed his lips tightly at her words. Indeed. Maddie had always been the one with the initiative in their contract marriage. Maddie was the granddaughter-in-law that Grandpa Brahmasta had decided on. He had half-forced Harvey to marry Maddie and requested for this marriage to last for at least 3 years, unless Maddie was willing to get a divorce. Looking at her side profile, Harvey did not understand how a woman could change her attitude so quickly. He was about to say something when Harvey suddenly heard his phone ring. Maddie looked back and frowned when she saw the name on the screen. Priscilla Denendra, that woman who kept seducing Harvey and bullying the host. She clearly lusted after Harvey, yet she always pretended to be pitiful and innocent. She was much more shameless than Madeline. Maddie stared fixedly at Harvey. Suddenly she thought of something and approached him with a mischievous smile. With raised brows, she used her hand to tease his Adam's apple as she said, "CEO Brahmasta really knows how to play around. You're with your wife, but you're going to talk on the phone with your mistress. Is she here to rush you to divorce me?" Harvey looked at her deeply. He did not speak, nor did he pick up the call. The ringing eventually stopped on its own. Maddie languidly pushed Harvey away and fiddled with her hair. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrupt you from picking up your call." Maddie didn't look apologetic at all. "I just want to tell you that even if it's a contract marriage, you can't seduce other people and cheat on me." If word got out, wouldn't she lose face? She did not want the headlines of the newspapers and media to be filled with photos of her being cheated on. Maddie's brows knitted together as she thought of something and added, "Otherwise, I'll also look for a paramour outside too." Harvey narrowed his eyes dangerously and looked at Maddie. "Does she know what she's talking about?" Ring, ring, ring. Priscilla called again. Maddie shrugged and turned to look out the window. "Do you need me to cover my ears?" she asked. "There's no need. We're not in the kind of relationship you think we are." Harvey took out a black card and placed it in her palm. He said, "Go and take a walk in the mall. The chauffeur will pick you up at night." Looking at the credit card with no credit limit, she opened the car door without hesitation. She stood by the side of the road and waved at him through the window, sending him a provocative glance. "Remember what I said." She swiped her thumb across her neck and mouthed the words to him before turning around and walking away in the opposite direction. Harvey looked at her back view through the rearview mirror. He lowered the soundproof divider and asked, "How has Grandpa's health been recently?" "Pretty good," the driver replied respectfully. She added, "Miss Danandra's father has been treating old Master Brahmasta." Harvey heaved a sigh of relief. He stared at Priscilla's number and reluctantly called her back. "What's the matter?" On the boulevard, falling flowers floated onto Maddie's shoulders. Harvey's car disappeared from her sight. Maddie kicked 2 pieces of gravel and continued to stroll around. Casually pocketing the black card, Maddie bought a bottle of Coke and waited for the traffic light at the cross junction. Why am I here?" She looked up and was stunned when she saw the familiar storefront. This was the bar she was at last night when she had just woken up. Thinking about the drugged alcohol and the blonde, Maddie changed direction and headed straight for the bar. In her memory, this bar was quite safe. Why was she targeted? There must be something fishy going on. Since she had time, she did not mind finding out who was the person who wanted to harm her. Coincidentally, she was not in a good mood. Knock, knock, knock. Maddie lifted her hand and knocked on the door. Behind the dark glass door, a few figures could be vaguely seen. However, it was not opening hours yet, so no one opened the door for her. Maddie tilted her head and pondered for a moment. Then, she put the cola aside, rubbed her palm, and loosened her joints. Then, she raised her leg and kicked the door. Clang! The door crashed to the ground. The few service staff who were smoking behind the door were so frightened that their faces turned pale. You, who are you? Where's your boss? Get him to come out. I have something to ask him." Maddie picked up the cola and dusted herself off before swaggering in. "Stop. You can't just enter." The attendant finally recalled that he had seen her last night. Just as he was about to stop her, he saw Maddie glaring at him coldly. He was so frightened that he dared not utter a word. "Where is the surveillance room?" Maddie asked. The waiter was so frightened that he surrendered immediately and pointed to the darkness at the end of the corridor as he told her. "Second room on the left." In the surveillance room, the bar owner rushed over. The security guards were squatting in a row against the wall with their hands on their heads. They were all wounded and did not dare to make a sound. Maddie pulled up the surveillance video from last night. Sure enough, she saw the blonde sneakily talking to a woman. The woman looked familiar. Priscilla. It was her. Maddie's cold gaze swept across the entire place. The owner of the bar smiled and said warily, "Madam, please don't thrash the shop again. We're just a small business and can't withstand your torment." Last night, they had all witnessed Maudie's combat ability. If this bar were to be thrashed again, it would completely close down and not be able to open for business again. Maudie turned around and pointed at the blonde on the screen. She asked, "Do you know this person? He's a hooligan from around the area and often comes over to support the business." The bar owner didn't dare to hide anything as he answered her. Maudie pushed the electric batons carried by the security guards around and picked two that were handy for her. She looked up and said, "Get him here. Right now, immediately, this instant." Half an hour later, the blonde pushed open the glass door with his bandaged hand. "Why did you call me here? Is there a nice lass?" the blonde snickered. Before he could finish his sentence, he was hit on the back of his head. Crash. He fell to the ground on his back, and a pair of high heels stepped on his chest. The blonde tried to struggle, but he couldn't move against the light. He strained to see Maudie's face. His heart skipped a beat. "I was wrong. Please forgive me." The blondie felt a slight pain in his hand that had been pierced by the glass, and he hurriedly begged for mercy. Maudie did not expect him to be so cowardly. She squatted down slightly and pinched his chin. She asked, "What did Priscilla ask you to do?" The blonde wanted to deny it, but when he saw the surveillance monitors beside him, he immediately confessed. "She asked me to make you drink then, FXCKU, and take a few nude photos and send them to her. I was just greedy for money and small gains. I won't dare to do it again." When the blonde heard Maudie's tone, he knew that she was not on good terms with Priscilla. He quickly told her everything he knew and wanted to absolve himself of blame. Hearing this, Maudie narrowed her eyes dangerously. Priscilla wanted to ruin her. Did she think she could get together with Harvey just like that? Well, this Priscilla is quite ruthless, but she's unlucky. The current Maudie was no longer a brainless rich woman who only knew how to cry. Instead, she was a violent special agent who would pay someone back many folds more. Give her a call and say. Maudie gave him a few simple instructions. The blonde immediately dialed Priscilla's number and put her on speaker. He said, "Miss Danandra, everything has been settled. Come and get the photos." He told the lie very naturally, and Priscilla believed him. The two of them agreed to meet at the bar later. When he hung up, Maudie held out her hand to him and asked, "Do you have more of last night's drug?" The blonde did not dare to disobey her. He immediately nodded and bowed as he took out a packet and said, "I still have it. I still have it." Maudie took it from him and poured it into the cola bottle in front of them. She stirred it and shook it twice before walking towards the blonde. The blonde was so frightened that he almost wet his pants as he watched her approach. What do you want?" Sympathetically shaking her head, Maudie pressed on his chin and forced the bubbling coke into his mouth, not caring about whether he was choking or not. "This is what you fed me yesterday. I'll give it back to you. Enjoy it." Grabbing the blonde by the collar, she threw him into the storeroom and locked the door. Listening to the shrill and terrifying screams coming from inside, Maudie looked at the service staff in the bar and threatened, "No one is allowed to inform Priscilla, or else you will end up like him. You guys wouldn't want that, would you?" "Don't worry, we didn't see anything." The bar owner took the lead to express his loyalty. "This woman is too ruthless. Ring." Maudie's phone suddenly rang. She looked down at the unfamiliar number and picked it up in confusion. "Is this Maudie?" A sweet female voice came from the other end of the line. Maudie tilted her head and narrowed her eyes, but did not respond. "Last night felt good, didn't it?" the woman continued. Maudie instantly realized who she was. It was. Priscilla, if you don't want Harvey to know about your scandal, go to the bar from last night. I have something to talk to you about. Of course, you can choose not to go. However, those nude photos of yours that I have my hands on will probably be sent to the inbox of Harvey and the Brahmasta Corporation. Priscilla threatened. Maudie's lips curled up. She admired Priscilla's courage. She doesn't even have the nude photos yet. But she just couldn't wait to make the threat. Okay, I'll wait for you at the bar. Maudie shook her head and smirked derisively. She pulled out a chair and waited for Priscilla's arrival. At night, the bar was open for business as usual. The cacophony of music made Maudie's head hurt. Nestled in a booth, she swirled a glass of red wine and admired the stripper's performance as she waited for Priscilla to arrive. Then, she caught a glimpse of a figure outside the door. Her lips curled up into a smile. She's here. Priscilla appeared at the bar with a few bodyguards. She was wearing a strapless sequin dress that showed off her beautiful figure. From the moment she entered, she had attracted countless greedy and lecherous gazes of men. Soon, Priscilla threw her bag onto the booth seat and stared at Maudie with jealousy. As a woman, she had to admit that Maudie's beauty was one that went deep. Maudie only needed to lift her eyes to steal a man's heart. Sit. Maudie gestured with her hands. Priscilla frowned and sat across from her. We meet again. Priscilla was not used to Maudie looking straight into her eyes and even felt a little guilty. This woman seems to have changed. However, when she saw the hickeys and traces of love making on Maudie's neck, her heart felt more at ease. Asking me to come here, do you need something? Maudie asked on purpose. Priscilla composed herself and revealed a derisive expression. I really admire you. You were so crazy in bed with someone last night, yet you can still pretend to be so calm today. What if Harvey finds out? Do you think he'll divorce you and make you leave the marriage with nothing? Maudie pretended to be surprised and widened her eyes as she said, You know about me being in bed. Do you have a voyeurism fetish? You? Priscilla gritted her teeth, her face ashen. Don't bother about how I found out. You should be thinking about how you can make me happy. Otherwise, I'll send your nude photos to Harvey. She leaned back slightly and casually placed her hand on the armrest, pretending to be calm. Maudie looked at her in amusement and said, Oh, how are the nude photos? Was the angle and posture good? Why don't you let me take a look first? Priscilla did not expect her to say that. Stunned, she shouted. Maudie, how can you be so shameless? Coincidentally, the DJ's music stopped at that moment. This conversation caused everyone around to stop and surround the two of them to watch the show. I'm the victim yet. I'm shameless. Then wouldn't Miss Danandra be even more shameless considering she secretly took photos of someone else? Maudie's mocking words caused the crowd to burst into laughter. Priscilla was embarrassed. She said, Stop being so stubborn. I'll give you a chance now. How about it? Pointing at the alcohol barrel beside her, she said, As long as you kneel down and finish this barrel of alcohol, I'll delete your nude photos. Priscilla deliberately pointed at the group of men around her and continued, How about I send it out right now and let everyone take a look? I'm sure they'll like your photos very much. They might even fight to take you away tonight. The men around them whistled fearlessly. However, the bar owner, security guards, and service staff all looked at Priscilla in sympathy. Why did she have to take things so hard and provoke this, madam? Oh, drink alcohol. Maudie stood up with a smile, picked up the alcohol barrel, and poured it over Priscilla's head. Cold alcohol flowed down Priscilla's hair. Ah! Priscilla screamed in shock as she ran her fingers through her wet hair. She pointed at Maudie and said, What are you guys waiting for? Strip off her clothes. Maudie clapped her hands. There was not a single drop of alcohol on her body. She simply clicked her tongue when she saw the bodyguards charging towards her. There's not a single person who can fight. I'm really not interested at all. All right, I'll play with you guys. With raised eyebrows, she easily grabbed the fist of one of the strong men and twisted it. The man wailed and fell to the ground and was unable to get up. Aren't you too weak? Maudie blinked and commented as she looked at the people around her who had stopped moving. Again, said Maudie, as she casually tied her hair up and hooked her fingers provocatively. The bodyguards did not dare to approach her rashly. They helped up their brothers who were lying on the ground and examined their injuries. Good for nothings, Maudie sneered. Using her hand to support herself on the short table, she leapt up and landed beside Priscilla. Priscilla was in such a sorry state that she couldn't even open her eyes. She could only vaguely make out her figure and said warily, "You, don't come over. Next time, I can introduce you to a few mercenary companies. At least you'll then be somewhat tied against me. They will be more useful than these good-for-nothings. But you lost this time, so you should pay the price for provoking me." After saying that, Maudie raised her hand and pressed Priscilla's head down into the barrel of cold alcohol. She watched as Priscilla kept flailing her hands and struggling. The moment Priscilla felt like she was about to suffocate, she finally felt Maudie's grip loosen. And she got up. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, preparing to retaliate. However, her expression changed in an instant, and she acted like she was a victim. "Brother Harvey, you're here. Hurry up and save me. Maudie is so scary." Maudie turned around and saw the tall and handsome man looking at her from a few steps away, with an ambiguous expression on his face. Priscilla ran to Harvey's side and tugged at his clothes. She raised her finger to point at Maudie and said, "Brother Harvey, it's her." Maudie called me to the bar, claiming that she had something to discuss with me, but after I came, she hit me and bullied me. Everyone around here can testify for me. You have to stand up for me and teach her a lesson. Priscilla lied as she hid behind Harvey. She secretly flashed Maudie a provocative smile. Maudie watched as Harvey's entire body turned cold, and he walked towards her step by step, with his lips pursed. She could not help but clench her fists and prepare to defend herself. He believes what that woman said. Furrowing her eyebrows, Maudie couldn't help but sneer. "CEO Brahmasta, what are you doing? Are you planning to cause trouble for your wife for the sake of your mistress?" However, Harvey ignored her ridicule. His towering figure suddenly stopped 2 steps away from her, and he gently draped his suit jacket over her body, helping Maudie ward off the gazes on her body. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. He then handed her an expensive handkerchief and said, "Wipe your hands." Maudie looked down and realized that she had somehow gotten a cut on her hand and was bleeding. Priscilla stared at them in disbelief as they stood side by side. She said, "Brother Harvey, what are you doing? No matter what she does, no one can touch my woman." He looked around his surroundings while using the handkerchief to bandage Maudie's wound. "No one can teach her a lesson, including me," he said indifferently. Maudie was slightly taken aback by his protectiveness. She raised her head and stared at his side profile. "No, Brother Harvey, you have no idea what kind of woman Maudie is. She betrayed you and fooled around with other men." Priscilla couldn't stand the provocation and shook her head hysterically. Shoving the onlookers aside, she rushed to Maudie's side and yanked the jacket off her. Pointing at the bruises and love-making marks on Maudie's exposed skin, she shrieked, "This is the evidence. She's a SLXT, a prostitute that will sleep with anyone. Don't be fooled by her." Priscilla could no longer maintain her pure and innocent demeanor as she cursed. However, Maudie couldn't take it anymore. She raised her leg and kicked Priscilla in the stomach, sending her flying to the ground. She sneered. "You need evidence to accuse me." "My husband was the one who made these marks last night." Maddie took the opportunity to nestle in Harvey's embrace. She lifted his chin with her index finger and moved her red lips closer to his and seductively nuzzled his lips. "I had sex with my own man, no matter how intense it is. What does it have to do with you?" Priscilla clutched her stomach, unable to speak due to the pain. She stared at Harvey in disbelief. "No, impossible. They will never sleep together in the same room. Harvey doesn't love her at all." "Honey, I don't think she believes me. Why don't you tell her yourself how intense we were last night?" Maddie's calf rubbed against Harvey's calf intentionally or otherwise. She hooked her arm around his neck and gently breathed into his ear. As if showing off, she glanced at Priscilla and said, "Tell her how amazing you are. How did you make me unable to get out of bed?" Harvey's ears turned red, but he did not deny it. Priscilla's eyes were bloodshot and brimming with tears. Her expression was full of indignance. What right does Maddie have to get Harvey? He should be hers. They were clearly going to get a divorce soon. "You're shameless. A CLXT that everyone can FXCK. She slept with a gangster from the bar last night and went home after that to seduce brother Harvey. He must have been forced." Priscilla fumbled for her phone on the ground. She yelled, "I have proof. I have a witness. Just, you wait." Maddie looked at her sympathetically. How much does Priscilla like Harvey, such that she can deceive herself into thinking that she could force Harvey to sleep with her? Harvey instructed the bodyguards to collect the phones of everyone in the bar and delete the photos and videos that had been taken secretly. Meanwhile, Maddie disdainfully removed his handkerchief that had been used to bandage her hand. With a frown, she then skillfully wrapped it around the wound and tied 2 knots using her mouth. Very quickly, Priscilla dialed Marcel's number and put it on speaker. She looked at Maddie smugly. "Listen up. I'll call Maddie's paramour right away. She's doomed. This time, ring, ring, ring." No one picked up the phone, and Priscilla's expression gradually became anxious. The bar owner and the security guards were worried. They turned to look at the door of the next room. "The blonde isn't dead, is he?" Maddie yawned and lazily picked up 2 bottles of beer, handing one to Harvey. She said mockingly, "Beer goes well with watching a show." Ring. Such a wing. Just as Priscilla was about to lose hope, the call finally went through. Frantically, she asked, "Hurry up and tell me, was it you who slept with Maddie last night? Didn't you take photos as well?" In the room next door, the blonde was scratching his body non-stop due to the strong drug. He banged his head against the wall and was in so much agony with no means of release. At that moment, he hated Priscilla to death. "Priscilla, Dinendra, you BX teach, stupid BX teach, crazy BX teach." A series of curses interrupted Priscilla's interrogation. Curling up his body, the blonde said in a quavering voice, "You FX-seeking told me that Maddie is a woman who can be manipulated by anyone. You promised me $5 billion for having a one-night stand with her to help her relax her muscles and bones and take some photos. Where's the money? She's FX-seeking better at fighting than the special forces. I didn't even touch a single finger of hers, but I'm injured all over. Priscilla, just you wait for me to get out. You have to give me every single cent. Otherwise, I'll FXCK you." Priscilla screamed in disbelief. "You're lying. Don't spout nonsense." Oh, she smashed her phone onto the ground. When Maddie saw Priscilla's panic-stricken expression, she knew that Priscilla's inner defenses had completely collapsed. Finishing the last mouthful of beer, she picked up the beer bottle and smashed it against the low table. She then held the sharp shard and walked to Priscilla. "Speaking of which, I have to thank you." Maddie tugged at Priscilla's hair, forcing her to look up at her. Her lips curled up into a bloodthirsty smile. If it weren't for you, Harvey and I wouldn't have slept together so quickly and realized that we're very compatible. You can be considered our matchmaker." Maddie used the shard from the beer bottle to gently stroke Priscilla's exquisite yet kitsch face. She stopped at her artery and stroked it. The chilly sensation made Priscilla feel as if death was just a hair's breadth away from her. And she shivered. "I'll let you off this time, but the next time I see you, it won't be that simple." Maddie gently slit Priscilla's skin in a punishing manner. She controlled her strength and only let a few drops of blood seep out, but it was enough to scare Priscilla. Priscilla shrieked, and her face turned ashen as she collapsed onto the ground, like a pile of mud. "Let's go." She turned to look at Harvey and said. Priscilla yelled hysterically towards their backs. "Maddie, don't be too smug. Brother Harvey doesn't love you at all. He must have already asked you for a divorce. He'll definitely divorce you." Maddie paused in her tracks, but only for a moment before she walked out as per normal. In the parking lot, Maddie sat in the back seat and kept a certain distance from Harvey. Other than her face, she could not find any other good points about Priscilla. She clicked her tongue twice and stared at Harvey. Propping her chin on her hand, she said, "CEO Brahmasta, your aesthetic taste needs to be improved. You want to divorce me for someone like that. Even if you're looking for a mistress, you should at least pick someone of high quality that suits your status." Harvey stared at the neon sign outside the window and subconsciously retorted, "The divorce isn't because of her, huh?" Maddie blinked and leaned over out of curiosity as she asked, "What's the reason then?" Forming connections through marriage between families was common in the financial industry. Personally, she thought that Maddie's looks were pretty food, so there was indeed no need for a divorce. Yet, Harvey wanted a divorce. Could there be an ulterior motive? Harvey did not want to answer. He simply turned back to meet her sparkling eyes and asked, "What about you? What's your reason for refusing to divorce me?" Maddie was speechless. "Aren't you being too calculative?" Maddie smirked. Her eyes roved around as she deliberately teased him. "There's unlimited money to spend if I'm with you. Also, you're not bad at your job and your skills in bed are quite good. Your size." Maddie gently pressed her hand against the base of his thigh. Narrowing her eyes, she stuck out the tip of her tongue and licked her lips. She said, "I'm very satisfied with that too, so I want to get a divorce after I've had my fill of you." Harvey was speechless. Damn it, she could actually easily arouse his desire now. Harvey exerted his strength, restraining her hands and pushing her down. He lowered his head and gently bit her earlobe, causing her to tremble slightly. "Don't arouse my fire," he said in a hoarse voice. Her beautiful body was a little soft from his teasing, but when she recalled how Priscilla had tugged on the corner of his shirt, she was enraged. Seizing the opportunity when he wasn't paying attention, she bent her knee and aimed for Harvey's manhood as she ruthlessly thrust it forward. Harvey narrowed his eyes and shifted his body slightly to dodge to the side. The two of them actually began exchanging blows with each other in the cramped car. Finally, Maddie restrained his arm and Harvey also grabbed her thigh. They froze. Only then did Maddie realize that the two of them were very close to each other. And their positions were very suggestive. Harvey could feel her breath on his neck. His voice was slightly off-key as he said, "Didn't you not know martial arts in the past?" Maddie raised her eyebrows and deliberately stroked her calf against the tent that had propped up in the man's pants at some point in time. She mocked. "Didn't you also not get a hard-on with me in the past?" Harvey groaned, his face turning as black as the base of a pot. People change all the time. Maddie lightly tapped Harvey's penis with her finger. She blinked seductively and said to the driver, "Drive." In the villa, after eating and showering, Maddie changed into a comfortable silk nightdress and watched television with Harvey in the living room. Harvey liked to watch the Financial Channel. But Maddie was unhappy because of what happened today, so she went against his wishes and changed channels one after another. Harvey frowned slightly, but did not say anything. Suddenly, change it back. Harvey's tone became more serious. Maddie couldn't be bothered with him and continued changing the channels. However, the next moment, he snatched the remote control and changed it back to the previous channel. It was a military news channel. Who would have thought that a prominent magnate would be interested in military affairs? Maddie chuckled. She couldn't be bothered to argue with him. Just as she was about to lower her head and fiddle with her phone, she suddenly heard a piece of news being broadcasted on the television. She raised her head and leaned forward slightly to turn up the volume. A few explosive images were shown, followed by a summary from the Ministry of National Defense at their press conference. It is reported that the national treasure that was stolen a few days ago has been recovered safely. One of the high-ranking special agents from the Ministry of Defense who participated in this operation has unfortunately died in an accident. The special agent, codenamed M, has participated in many of the Ministry of Defense's important missions and was a rare talent. We deeply mourn her death. Maddie's brows furrowed, and she used the remote control to freeze the frame. Looking at the crashed helicopter, she immediately recalled some fragmented memories and became suspicious. There were 3 other agents on the same helicopter as her. Why is she the only one who lost her life in the crash? Yet the others are still alive and well. This doesn't make sense. Crash. Harvey stared blankly at the news broadcasting. His expression was exceptionally unnatural, and he accidentally knocked over the hot water bottle. As Maddie was very near to him, her thigh still got scalded, despite her dodging quickly. "I'm sorry." Harvey hurriedly stood up and rushed to grab the first aid kit to treat her wounds. His hands were trembling slightly. Maddie scrutinized him curiously and asked, "What's wrong?" She rarely saw Harvey lose his composure like this. Harvey pursed his lips before saying, "It's nothing. I just felt that with M's ability, she wouldn't die from an accident. I was a little shocked." Maddie hid her surprise and asked teasingly, "Do you know her?" Harvey's hand froze for a moment. "Not really. We only met once. She saved me previously." Harvey put away the gauze. Many memories rushed into his mind. That year, when he returned from Country S and was about to drive across the border, he was stopped by mercenaries. Just as he was about to get out of the car and make a move, an agent from the Ministry of Defense suddenly rushed over after receiving a mission. The agent slid down the helicopter rope and landed beside their car. Harvey would never forget how M valiantly made a clean sweep of the group of mercenaries. After dealing with the mercenaries, M flashed a smile towards the interior of the car with tinted windows and saluted, codename M, "At your service." She was like a ruffian, but she left a deep impression in Harvey's heart. As Maddie listened to his story, she suddenly remembered that she had indeed participated in a protection operation a few years ago. She had left after beating people up and did not even see who was in the car. Who would have thought that it was him? There, quite faded, but she had only saved him once. There was no need for him to be so agitated upon hearing that she had died. Was there? Maddie moved closer to Harvey and stared him in the eyes as she asked with a smile, "Could it be that you like her?" The Brahmasta Corporation donates a huge sum of money to the Ministry of Defense every year. Is it because of her? Harvey neither admitted nor denied it. He stood up and pointed at her wound as he said, "Remember not to let it touch water." Maddie shrugged. She didn't think anyone would care or feel sad because of Special Agent M's death. She looked at Harvey's back with an ambiguous expression. Her mouth opened slightly and she said lightly, "If M knew that you did all this for her, she would probably feel a little touched." Harvey stopped in his tracks for a moment before heading to the study. In the bedroom, on the second floor. Maddie closed her eyes and replayed the operation in her mind. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that something was amiss. She hugged her computer and sat cross-legged on the bed. She then typed in the web address of a special agents forum and tried to dig for some information. According to an anonymous tip from a few insiders, the other 3 who participated in the operation claimed to have fainted due to the impact of the explosion. When they woke up again, someone had already rescued them onto the rubber dinghy. There was no sign of M beside them. How is that possible? It doesn't make sense. Everyone was rescued in time. Except for her, it was as if this explosion had been specially prepared for her. It was a murder. Maddie recalled the identities of the 3 people. Other than her disciple Ben, she was not familiar with the other 2. Other than that, there was also a member Kay, who was responsible for receiving them. Kay was her archenemy. When the accident happened, he wasn't on that helicopter. He had sufficient motive and time to act. Kay was the biggest suspect in her murder. However, the other 3 cannot be ruled out as suspects. Snap. Maddie broke the ballpoint pen in 2 and a cold glint flashed across her eyes. On the forum page, Maddie tapped lightly on her keyboard and tried to log into her personal Ministry of Defense secret agent account. After entering the password a few times, a warning popped up on the computer screen. Maddie's eyebrows knitted together. She thought of some possibilities and decisively cut off the internet connection. DXM it. Someone is tracking her IP address. Maddie looked at the Trojan horse virus that had been implanted in a short span of time. Gritting her teeth, she quickly changed the procedure. She was the youngest and most promising agent in the Ministry of Defense and was one of the top in terms of hacking and internet information. Unfortunately, Maddie had been careless and nearly revealed her current location. If that group of people chased her here, it might have involved unnecessary trouble. Very quickly, she completely wiped out the Trojan horse virus. Maddie, who had taken care of the problem, was a little frustrated. She threw the computer on the floor and went to stand on the terrace, feeling the breeze. The Ministry of Defense is paying so much attention to M's account and even set up layers of firewalls and tracking systems. What kind of conspiracy is hidden behind this? Just then, the door was suddenly pushed open with a soft sound. Maddie's muscles instantly tensed up. Out of reflex, she approached the person and used her arm to push the person's shoulder, pushing him up against the wall. Just as she was about to attack, she saw that it was actually Harvey. Maddie gritted her teeth and controlled her anger. She lectured him. If you want to enter someone else's room, you have to knock on the door. This is courtesy, understand? Harvey was speechless. Isn't this his house? Maddie noticed his dazed expression and realized that she had overreacted. She lowered her eyes before swiftly putting on a devilish smile and lifting up Harvey's chin. What's the matter? CEO Brahmasta, are you burning with desire in the middle of the night and can't control yourself? So you came to find me to help you extinguish the fire. Harvey was silent for a few seconds. Then, he took out the first aid kit and showed it to her. He said, "Go sit by the bed. I found a better medicine for scalds." Maddie was taken aback. Is he here to help her? Because of the scald? But she asked if he wanted her to extinguish his fire. Ahem. That's embarrassing. Harvey did not mind. He pushed her onto the bed and used his knee to separate her legs. As expected, her fair legs were red. Maddie was stunned for a moment. She then said, "CEO Brahmasta. This position feels a tad bit wrong, doesn't it? Lie down," he said coldly, seeming to be somewhat angry. Maddie sighed. and lay face down on the bed with her long legs spread open as she let him manipulate her. Harvey's rough fingers rubbed against her smooth and tender legs. Coupled with the cooling sensation of the ointment, she couldn't help but let out a soft moan. Harvey gritted his teeth and paused for a moment. His eyes were filled with desire. It was easy to remember how intense they'd been that night. After a long while, he continued to apply the ointment on her. Maddie could tell that the time taken to apply the medicine was much longer than before, and that the breathing of the man behind her had become heavier. She could not help but snicker. She turned around and deliberately caressed his thigh with her fair and soft feet. Seeing that the fire in his eyes was getting hotter, she retracted her foot and pulled the blanket over herself. "I'm sorry, CEO Brahmasta, my leg was scalded today. So I really can't have SXX with you. You can take care of it yourself." Harvey gazed deeply at Maddie. She really made him confused at times. "Have a good rest." Harvey abruptly pushed her away and left without looking back. He slammed the door shut behind him. Only then did Maddie get up and put the shoulder strap that had fallen back in place. Her eyes turned cold. Recalling the Ministry of Defense's tracking, she knew that she could not reveal any information and let others know that M was still alive. All information and data about M, as well as people or things, were possibly all under their control now. It was a trap, waiting for her to walk right in. Thankfully, they don't know about this appearance. Maddie looked at her new identity in the mirror and gently wiped the mirror with her hand. "Don't worry, I will use this identity to counterattack and investigate the truth." Ha! The next day, in the dining room, Maddie picked out the peas and threw them into Harvey's bowl. Feeling his gaze on her, she tilted her head and asked, "What's wrong? I don't eat peas. You can tell the nanny to not put that in that future." Harvey reminded her as he drank his coffee. The doorbell rang. The butler led a somewhat familiar middle-aged man to the dining room. Maddie narrowed her eyes and sized him up. "CEO Brahmasta, sorry to disturb yours and Miss Wijaya's meal, but Priscilla went on a hunger strike at home." She cried and wanted to commit suicide, saying that she couldn't stand the humiliation Miss Wijaya brought upon her. "In order to take care of Priscilla, I really can't continue to be old Master Brahmasta's attending physician. Today, I specially came here to ask you to find someone more qualified than me." He stared fixedly at Maddie. Realization dawned on Maddie, and she exclaimed, "He is Priscilla's father, Ledger Danandra." It was said that Ledger is a medical expert, but Grandpa Brahmasta is seriously ill. She never knew. Harvey looked at him with a deep frown and said, "Are you threatening me? How would I dare to? However, I still have to remind you that the old master is in a bad condition and time is tight. You had better make a decision early. Otherwise, even if the gods come, they won't be able to save the old master," Ledger said, and looked at Maddie smugly. "He shall see how long this woman can occupy the position of the CEO's wife." Maddie did not speak and quietly observed. She detected the fleeting worry and anxiety in Harvey's eyes. After connecting Ledger's words, Maddie suddenly understood something. That day, Harvey said that the divorce isn't for Priscilla. So it's true. He is doing it for Grandpa Brahmasta. Is Ledger using the life of Harvey's closest kin's life as a threat to force Harvey to marry Priscilla? I thought it was a mad dog that came out of nowhere and hurt my ears with its barking. Turns out it's Dr. Danendra. Maddie gently pushed Harvey down and made him sit. She walked straight to Ledger and sized up his face, which looked very much like Priscilla. In disdain, "What? An annoying father and daughter pair. I saw the word wicked written on your forehead. You're using your patient's life as blackmail to demand benefits. How can you call yourself a doctor when you're doing something so unethical? Stop embarrassing yourself." Ledger's eyes widened in shock. This woman dared to berate him. Didn't they say that Maddie is weak and brainless and doesn't know how to do anything except cry? Ledger was trembling with anger, but he did not want to argue with Maddie due to his status. He simply said to Harvey, "CEO Brahmasta, this woman is scolding old Master Brahmasta's savior. Aren't you going to do something about it?" "Savior?" Maddie frowned and asked with a cold smile, "Did you save him? You clearly held Grandpa Brahmasta's life in your hands and threatened my husband, yet you still have the cheek to say such things so shamelessly?" Ledger glared at her and choked on his words. Steam came out of his nostrils, and he finally raised his hand to point at Maddie. "What do you know? Without me, the old master would have died countless times." After Ledger finished speaking, Harvey's expression darkened. "CEO Brahmasta, you had better think carefully. Do you want to give up the old master's life for this crazy woman? It's not easy to find another doctor who can treat his illness now. At least, you won't be able to find one in Indonesia." The two fingers that Ledger was waving in front of Maddie's eyes were particularly annoying. Crack! Maddie raised her hand and broke his index finger. She watched as Ledger squatted on the ground and wailed in agony. "If you don't know what to say, you don't need your tongue as well." Maddie dusted her hands in disgust, watching as Ledger covered his mouth, his eyes filled with fear as he collapsed onto the ground. Ledger looked at Harvey in disbelief. Seeing that he did not stop her, Ledger shouted, You're a crazy woman. How are you worthy of being the young madam of the Brahmasta family? You're simply a devil, a lunatic, CEO Brahmasta. Do you still want to be with her? As long as you get a divorce and marry Priscilla." Harvey remained silent, allowing Maddie to grow impatient. She lifted her leg and kicked Ledger to the ground before stepping on his face and grinded on it twice. "I'm not worthy. Who is then? Your precious daughter, aside from drugging others, colluding with hooligans to harm others, and doing dirty deeds, what else can she do? Is she worthy?" Maddie gently patted his face and said sympathetically, "If you're blind, I can dig out your eyeballs for you and give them to those who need them. Priscilla isn't such a girl, it's you. You occupied the position of the young madam of the Brahmasta family and caused her to lose her mind. That's why she did something so extreme." Ledger's whole body was trembling, but he did not forget to clear Priscilla's name. "You can't even treat your daughter's mental illness, yet you're boasting about treating Grandpa Brahmasta." Maddie sneered and reminded him, "You should treat mental illnesses as soon as possible." Ledger almost vomited blood out of anger. Seeing that the situation was getting out of control, Harvey stood up and held her hand. Pulling her to his side, "Men, protect Dr. Dinendra well and send him out." The bodyguards heard the order and dragged Ledger up from the ground roughly. Ledger flailed his arms, wanting to chase the bodyguards away. "SS! It hurts. Be gentler, Harvey. Are you trying to murder me?" Standing side by side, Harvey and Maddie corrected him without any expression on their faces. "It's protection." Ledger was speechless. Do they think he's stupid? The bodyguards carried Ledger and threw him out of the villa. On the open lawn, Ledger fell to the ground in a sorry state. He yelled, "Harvey, you will regret this sooner or later. You will definitely beg me to come back. You'll beg me to let Priscilla marry you. When that time comes, I will make you kneel down and apologize to me." Maddie's brows furrowed, and she used the remote control to close the curtains to block out Ledger's face. She turned around and stared at Harvey as she asked, "Why didn't you tell me about Grandpa's illness and your reason for wanting to divorce me? What can be resolved by telling you? I don't want you to be worried as well." Old Master Brahmasta doted on Maddie, and Maddie liked Old Master Brahmasta. Harvey did not want Maudie to get involved and live in agony every day. Nestled in the sofa, Harvey put his palms together and lightly propped his chin up on them. For a long time, he had been searching for doctors both domestically and overseas. But it always ended in disappointment. Looking at his dejected expression, Maudie suddenly felt her heart soften. With both hands on the small coffee table, she pushed herself and sat on the table. She asked, "How do you know that I don't have any solutions?" Harvey lifted his head and met her eyes. A trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. "Have you heard of the famous doctor, Felix Abraham?" Maudie hesitantly tossed out a name. Harvey's gaze shifted slightly, and he asked, "What's your relationship with him?" "He is considered half a master to mine. When he was here previously, I picked up a few skills from him by chance." Feeling a tad bit guilty, Maudie fiddled with her nails out of habit. She stole a glance at Harvey's expression and could tell that he did not believe her. Felix was the best disciple of Special Agent M of the Ministry of Defense and had learned 80% of her medical skills. Now, she could only use her own disciple as a replacement. Maudie felt that she was losing out. "Can you get in touch with him?" Harvey asked. Maudie shrugged her shoulders and shook her head as she said, "He should be on some battlefield where there's no signal. We have to wait for him to contact me." This was the truth. Harvey and Felix could be considered friends. In the early stages of old Master Brahmasta's grave illness, he had already thought of asking Felix for help. However, Felix was always busy at war, so he could not contact him and could only look for leisure. The clock was ticking, and the villa was exceptionally quiet. Actually, you don't have to think of ways to stall for time. Even if you don't know Felix and don't have any medical skills, I won't rush to divorce you again, he said. Harvey rubbed his temples tiredly and looked at Maudie. Harvey had witnessed all that she had been through in the past few days. It had completely overturned his impression and understanding of her. However, he still did not believe that she had any medical skills. In his opinion, Maudie was only trying to stall for time because she was afraid of being bullied again after the divorce. Previously, I didn't know that Priscilla and the Wijaya family treated you like this. In the final 3 months, I will keep up our marriage until the 3-year deadline ends. Don't worry. Using his hand to prop himself against the wall, he stood up and took a deep look at Maudie. Believe it or not, can you take me to the hospital tomorrow to visit Grandpa? Maudie knew that it was impossible for Harvey to trust her within a short period of time. That took time, and she also needed to see for herself how far old Master Brahmasta's health had deteriorated. Okay. Harvey walked around the mess and scattered furniture in the living room. His shoulders were slightly slumped, seemingly due to fatigue. Amandiwes, you see what? The next day, the sky was clear. In order to make Grandpa Brahmasta happy, Maudie dressed up to look more innocent. She changed into a white dress and let her hair down before waiting for Harvey on the ground floor of the building. At the ground floor of the hospital building, Maudie bought 2 bouquets of fresh flowers. She followed him to the lift that went straight to the VIP ward. When he pushed open the door, old Master Brahmasta was breathing weakly whilst lying on the hospital bed, covered in needles and detectors from various instruments. Has he always been like this? Maudie asked as she approached. She placed the flowers on the bedside table and squinted as she flipped through Grandpa Brahmasta's medical records. Harvey nodded lightly. He held old Master Brahmasta's hand and massaged his muscles to relax them. Harvey, Maudie, you're here. Old Master Brahmasta, who had been drifting in and out of sleep all day, opened his eyes for the first time. His breathing was rapid as he spoke in a feeble voice. Maudie took the initiative to run to his side. She smiled and said, "Yes, Grandpa. We came to see you. Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm okay. I can hold on." Staring at them, Old Master Brahmasta placed Harvey and Maudie's hands together. I'm still waiting to carry my great-grandson. Harvey was slightly stunned. Maudie, on the other hand, coaxed him. In that case, you have to recover quickly, Grandpa. You will have a great-grandson. Old Master Brahmasta laughed twice and suddenly coughed hard. When his breathing gradually stabilized, his experienced eyes saw through everything and said, Mayor only knows how to bluff this old man. I know that you guys haven't consummated your marriage yet. It's been almost 3 years. You don't know that. Maudie was stunned for a moment before she hooked her arm around Harvey's arm. As if putting on a show, she leaned her head gently against his shoulder and said shyly, We consummated our marriage a few days ago. Harvey especially likes sleeping with me. Harvey was speechless. This woman. Why are her words so crude? Maudie did not look the least bit embarrassed. She secretly went closer to Old Master Brahmasta and whispered, I reckon that you'll be able to hear some good news in a few months. So you have to listen to the doctor and receive treatment properly so that you can recover. You need to wait for your great-grandson to call you great-grandpa. Okay. Old Master Brahmasta realized that Harvey was just a little stunned, but did not retort. At that moment, he laughed so hard that the alarm on the equipment rang. The nurses and doctors rushed in and performed various tests on him. Maudie took a good look at Old Master Brahmasta's stats. She had some speculations in mind, but she needed facts to verify them and could not let Harvey know right then. Grandpa, the doctor said that you should rest well. I'll bring him to visit you again in a few days. Maudie and Harvey interlocked their fingers. She smiled as she waved to Grandpa Brahmasta, seeing that Old Master Brahmasta's face had a little more color than before, and that he had groggily dozed off again. Both of them remained silent.